Since the beginning of mankind's existence, we have believed in some kind of god or deity. Mankind has looked up into the stars and wondered if there's something controlling everything in the universe. All cultures have their gods, no matter where they are on the planet, and no matter how much contact they have had with other cultures. This makes it obvious that there's something in the human genome and human brain that makes us humans want to believe in such a supernatural force. The Indians have Hinduism. The Indonesians have Islam. In the West, we follow Christ. And in Jerusalem, they have the Torah. So why have all these distinct cultures all developed their own sense of God? Why have they felt it necessary to believe in some kind of higher power that is greater than them? Human beings are curious creatures. We wonder, we ponder, we philosophize about anything in the universe. We have a thirst for knowledge, and it is this that drives our scientific endeavors. And it is this that drove us in the beginning to search and create gods on which to satisfy our built-in need for answers. Religion is essentially early science. But unlike science, which is composed of theories and then the search through experiments and data to prove or disprove a theory, religion instead relies on pure faith to make it real in the minds of humans. It is, in a sense, an unfactual form of science, in which anyone who does not truly believe, who dares to question, can be labeled a non-believer, an infidel, and can be dealt honorific punishments. So, it is interesting that the same curiosity and need for answers that led to the invention of the deity is then met with dreadful consequences if it dares to take that curiosity to the point that it strives for proof of such a divine creature like a god. Religion has had a massive effect in the development of mankind as a species. It has had a massive effect on the invention, development, and enforcement of rules that have allowed communities and societies to maintain order and, as a consequence of that order, flourish. Mankind can be incredibly brutal, and as such, despite its good side, is often chaotic in nature. The selfish lusts of individuals and groups leads humans to do despicable things. So a rules-based order enforced by punishment if an individual or group does not follow those rules pushes a community to behave in a moral way. This improves the cohesion and functionality within a community, village, or city, and allows them to concentrate on economic development and trade. It is interesting, however, that people of faith are mostly adamant that their religion is the true religion of God, despite the fact that the absolute predominant reason they follow that particular religion is because of where they come from on the planet, or because their parents were of that religion, so they had that religion taught to them as a child. Most devout Christians from a country like the United Kingdom do not let it enter into their heads that had they been adopted by parents from a Muslim country, that they would most likely have the same devotion to Islam instead of Christianity. The simple fact is, all religions cannot be right, especially when you consider that most religions do not leave any space for other religions to be true. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there is but one God. So where does that leave Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and any other religion of this planet? There are passages in the Quran that not only say that non-believers should go to hell, it also encourages true Muslims to slaughter those that do not believe. Chapter 9, verse 5 of the Quran says, "Slay the idolaters wherever ye find them, arrest them, besiege them, and lie in ambush for them." Allah instructs the Prophet Muhammad. He continues, "Prophet, make war on the unbelievers and the hypocrites. Hell shall be their home, an evil fate." This is a particularly harsh fate for someone who simply is not convinced by their take on how the universe was created, especially when there is no evidence of Islam or any other religion. Simply believe, or else you and your family will be slaughtered. But Islam is not the only religion to be so harsh. In the Old Testament, there are similarly harsh teachings. Samuel chapter 15, verse 3, it says, "Now go and strike Amalek, and devote to them destruction all that they have. Do not spare them. Kill man, woman, child, infant, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey." So here we have scripture that specifically tells the Hebrews to kill children. So we are taught that God is just, kind, knows the secrets of our hearts, and that He is a loving God. Yet many texts in all the great books completely contradict that notion. If our God is supposed to be good and kind, encouraging such acts forces us to ask the question, is God good? Is God real? Everyone in the Christian world, and also many outside the Christian world, know the story of Noah's Ark. Most of us will have been taught that story as infants. Noah was a simple farmer who was tasked to build a gigantic ship by God. The reason God ordered Noah to build this gigantic ship is because God had decided to kill every human on the planet except Noah and his family. God wanted Noah to save a male and a female of every species of animal so that they could repopulate the planet once the floodwaters had receded. As a child, my understanding, in the way it was explained to me, was that it was fine for God to kill everybody, as all the people on the planet, estimated to be around 50 million, were in fact evil, so they all deserved to die. But what about the children of these evil people? What about the 1-month-old babies of these people? What about the child in the womb who has yet to be born? Were they all also evil? An unborn child has not committed any sin. An unborn child is innocent, yet God killed them all. This is a story of mass genocide, yet we teach it to our children at school. It is estimated that during the Holocaust, of our hearts. We are told that God created everything from nothing. However, this conflicts with what scientists have discovered through careful observation using the very latest scientific techniques and technology. The scientific view on how the universe got started is that of the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory states that there was a singularity, a ball of almost infinite mass, that had so much gravity that time itself could not function, and even light could not escape. Then suddenly, the ball of mass became unstable and exploded, producing an expanding cloud of energy and particles, which eventually clumped together to form lumps of particles, which as they further clumped together took on more mass, which increased their gravity and in turn made more particles attracted to them. This happened over and over again until giant rocks, planets and stars were formed, and we eventually had the universe as we see it today. In the Christian Bible, it says that God created everything out of nothing in 6 days. The Big Bang Theory is supported by the fact that galaxies are continuing to move apart. We know this because we have detected the cosmic radiation from the Big Bang. However, the theory that God made the Earth in 6 days has no evidence at all. And it also conflicts with the rock-solid evidence from geologists on how the Earth formed. The Earth was once a molten hot rock. As the rocks that came together to form it jostled around under the intense pressure of their collective gravity. Eventually, after millions of years, Earth began to cool. And then, with the cooling of the surface, asteroids were able to successfully deposit water onto the surface to create the oceans and the seas. In the Bible, it says that not only did this all take place in a matter of days, but that the entire planet was already covered in water. Then God made the land. So, not only does the Bible conflict with the science of geology, millions of years versus a few days, but the order in which it happened is also a complete and utter contradiction. Planets are always intensely hot when they first form, because of the gravity and friction of the billions of tons of rocks being squished together. So, there is no way that a planet could form with water on it first, because the water would simply vaporize as soon as it comes into contact with the forming planet. A planet has to cool so that the water can be cool enough to be in its liquid state on the surface of the planet. In fact, the center of Earth is still molten hot to this day. But why is this conflicting account of how the universe was made so important when asking the question, is God real? Well, if, as it is always suggested in the great books, that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-wise, then you would expect, as he describes the process of the universe being created by himself, that he would be scientifically accurate. After all, everything you see on Earth and in the stars is his work. Instead, we get an explanation that is beyond the possibilities of modern science, which, if the so-called prophets of 2,000 years ago were making this stuff up, it would be. No prophet back then would have had the ability to read up on modern science, so that their story would make factual scientific sense. However, if they really did get their information from God, who actually did do all the creating himself, you would expect it to be scientifically accurate. So, the question has to be asked. If these are the books of the gods, delivered by the prophets, who are actually told this by God, then why are they so scientifically wrong? Well, perhaps God has a bad memory. Perhaps he has gotten confused with the building of another planet. To be fair to God, there is an almost infinite number of planets in the universe. Our very own Milky Way galaxy is estimated to have 100 billion planets. So even with his divine wisdom and knowledge, he may have gotten things mixed up. Though unlikely when you consider he is supposed to be completely divine in every way. However, even if we prove the Big Bang Theory beyond a shadow of a doubt, we still cannot completely disregard the God theory, because, as stated earlier, the Big Bang was caused by the explosion of a singularity of almost infinite gravity and mass. So where did all the matter and energy in this singularity come from? In science, matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. They can change state. Matter can become energy, and energy can become matter. But you cannot create matter or energy out of nothing. What created this dense ball of matter and energy in the first place? Since nothing can be created by nothing, this leads us back to the God theory. The idea that something supernatural put that massive ball of energy and matter out there, and then maybe did something to it to make it explode, cannot be discounted. This provides us with an answer to explain the creation of the singularity that caused the Big Bang, and explains where the matter came from that fills our entire universe. The only problem with this is that you are back to the same question again. Who then created the supernatural entity or God that created the singularity that exploded and became our universe? If nothing can be created from nothing, then who or what created God? Whether you choose the God theory or not, in the end you have to accept that something was created from nothing, which goes against the very laws of physics. Either the singularity, with all its mass, just appeared into existence on its own, or God, who created it, just simply appeared into existence on his own. At some point, the very first thing just popped into existence. This exact conundrum is one of the many points that believers in religion use in their argument to convince people there is a God. They say that everything in the universe is cause and effect, and therefore, because scientists cannot explain where the singularity came from that started the Big Bang, religious people say that it must be God. It is true that these believers have pointed out a hole in the theory of the Big Bang. But that does not mean it simply, therefore, has to be God. The instant assumption that if something cannot be explained by science, then it must be God, is obviously presumptuous to say the least, as it could be some force of physics that scientists have not yet become aware of yet. After all, modern science has only been around since the 17th century, and the microchip, which has led to the advanced equipment that we have today that enables scientists to look deep into space and see things like cosmic radiation, has only been around since 1958. There are many things that people of faith have identified as God in the past, which we now know with superior technology is simply not true. Humans used to believe that when they saw lightning, that God was angry and was letting us know of his wrath. By the same rationale as the Big Bang plot hole, they said it must be God, because there's no rational or scientific explanation for it. The fact of the matter is, humans were simply too primitive to know what caused lightning, in the same way that we are too primitive now to know where the singularity came from that caused the Big Bang. It may have been God, but the simple fact is, we do not know. We may never know, and if we do eventually develop the technology to find out, it may take thousands of years. Another argument that those of faith make to argue for the existence of God is that of design. There are 6 main points that adamant believers use to, in their words, prove the existence of God. The design argument says that because nature has a logical and functional design, then there must be a designer. If you see a watch, it is obvious that somebody has designed it, as all the precision parts that are perfectly formed and put in the correct place for the watch to function could not have simply been shaped by natural occurrences and then by some miracle blown into the correct slots to make the watch function so beautifully. The problem with this argument is that they are talking about an inanimate object. You cannot simply apply this to the organic system, because due to the process of natural selection, if a characteristic is advantageous within a population of a species, then those individuals with that characteristic will survive and breed in higher numbers, leading to that characteristic not only becoming more common within the population, but also that characteristic becoming stronger and better developed. This is the pure logic of natural selection as it interacts with our DNA. A creature of consciousness has not sat and thought this development out. It is simply the process of natural selection following its logical course. Believers also within this point out that although the development of a characteristic within a population can be explained by natural selection, what about the sudden appearance of the characteristic in the first place? The example they use most often is that of eyes. Yes, they understand that natural selection has improved the ability of eyes to see, as those with better eyes would survive more often, and would therefore breed more often, and would therefore pass their genetics for better eyes onto the next generation. However, they ask, how did a characteristic like eyes come about in the first place, to then get the better development of natural selection? If there were no DNA coding for the build of eyes, then how did eyes suddenly appear? Light-sensitive creatures have been around since almost the start of life. Creatures like jellyfish were light-sensitive and eventually evolved into more complex forms of light sensitivity, which eventually became eyes. So infant eyes did not suddenly appear. They evolved from simple creatures that had light-sensitive cells. However, the believers will then argue, how did these simple creatures suddenly become light-sensitive if no creature before had the DNA to code for the development of light sensitivity? If no creature that had this characteristic had been seen before, then God must have designed it that way. Scientists claim that the DNA for a characteristic in its simplest form, suddenly appearing on Earth for the first time, is down to mutation. The DNA in our bodies mutates constantly due to radiation, sunlight, stress, malnutrition, and toxification. Thankfully, our bodies have an immune system which is able to keep this at bay most of the time. Mutation throws a spanner in the works of DNA and cell replication. So the absolute vast majority of the time, it creates a bad effect on an individual, such as disability or a condition like cancer. However, just like spinning a roulette wheel, if you spin it enough times through thousands of individuals within a population, it will by chance code for something that is advantageous eventually. This is a matter of undeniable mathematical fact. So in fact, we have eyes because sheer mathematical chance determined that at some point a mutation would appear that codes for very basic light sensitivity. And through natural selection and the fact that sight is a huge advantage to surviving, eyes were very slowly developed over millions of years. The first creature to have eyes, called the trilobites, lived in the ocean around 541 million years ago. When you consider how many creatures live in the oceans, and that life itself started 3.5 billion years ago, it is no mathematical stretch to understand that the development of some kind of organ that will allow a creature to see was essentially inevitable. The second most popular argument that religious believers present as proof of God is their statement that DNA has never actually occurred naturally or in the lab since its first creation, and therefore it must have been God in the first place. First of all, we have no idea if DNA is naturally occurring in nature. It may be that DNA molecules do get formed in nature, but then simply disintegrate within the vast oceans of our planet, or are destroyed by radiation or sunlight. It is, however, true that until recently, we could not make DNA from scratch. But now scientists have been able to make DNA from scratch. That argument has been destroyed. That does not mean for sure that God did not put DNA on Earth. It may have been God, or it may have been naturally occurring. It could have been an advanced alien race that travels the galaxy and colonizes planets by planting DNA, like the engineers in the science fiction film Prometheus, or like the Infinites in the space adventure film Star Warrior: The Legend of Icarus. In Star Warrior: The Legend of Icarus, the Infinites, who are the original species of the universe, traveled through space, making genetic adaptations of themselves so that they would be remembered. The Infinites would have appeared to be godlike to the primitive species, as the abilities of their advanced technology would have seemed like miracles. We simply do not know and will never know if the DNA that led to our species and the other creatures of our planet was designed or added to Earth by God. But then again, it is presumptuous to assume that if we cannot explain it, then it simply has to be God. Going back to the idea that it could have been aliens, God himself is an alien, and one must ask, at what point does an advanced alien race become a God race? It could be that an alien race did create the Earth in 6 days. Perhaps there are species out there who are so developed that they can do such things and also add DNA to these synthetic planets, of which one of them is our very own Earth. Perhaps in the far future, we humans will have the technology to build planets and populate them with life. At that point, will us humans become gods? To a primitive race, we would certainly appear to be gods. They would see us flying around in spaceships and think that is exactly what we are. It is entirely possible that this is what happened to the Egyptians, which is what enabled them to build such magnificent things like the pyramids. Another proof of the existence of God in the eyes of believers is that of moral law. Many religious people claim that morality comes from God. The fact that we know the difference between right and wrong is proof of God's existence. They argue that animals do not know the difference between right and wrong. They simply do what they do out of instinct and need. They argue that it is impossible to have morality, as it simply does not exist in natural nature, and therefore God must have put this design into us. To an extent, they are right. Much of our morality and standards of living come from the teachings of religion. The Bible is one big morality tale on how Jesus thought we should conduct ourselves in life. But we still do not know if the teachings of the Bible and the other great religions are from God. So, to presume that, because they have helped shape our morality and our societies to some extent, is due to God, leads to the presumption that God actually did transmit these messages to the great prophets. This is something we will never know for sure. Even if you were around during the time of Christ and even met him, you would not know for sure if he really was the Son of God or just a great teacher. Even if you saw him perform a miracle, you would not know for sure that that power came from God. It could be that his power came from another supernatural force. Witches were not instantly hailed as being the daughters of God because they were able to perform supernatural magic. Instead, they were burned at the stake. But it is not just religions of the world that had given the human race morality. It is also society. The laws of most countries do not come straight from the books of the great religions. They are developed by politicians who are, at least in the democratic world, to some extent answerable to the people. Most people do not commit offensive acts to other people because they understand that they would not want them done to themselves, and also would not want to suffer the consequences of being tried and sent to jail. Morality is simply logical, because we all know that we are safer living in a society that has rules, and that the vast majority of us are happy to abide by those rules, as we know it is an advantageous trade-off to keep ourselves and our families safe and in better health. Yes, religion has played a part in that. And if we presume that religion has actually come from God, then we can say that morality has in some part come from God. But to do that, we are yet again presuming that God exists, which puts us in another hypothetical chicken and egg situation. To say that something is proof that a particular thing exists hangs on the fact that the particular thing exists in the first place does not prove that it actually exists. The fifth most common proof that is offered to prove that God exists is the fact that we have free will. They claim that only God could give us free will. All creatures have free will. A dog can choose as to whether or not to fetch a stick. The fact that most of the time it will is down to its instinct to chase, dating back to its genetics as a wolf, and also the fact that it has fun whilst engaging in this game. Religious advocates claim that only humans have free will, but this is simply not true. Yes, the thought process before an animal does something is a much simpler one, as it draws on less experiences before it makes its decision, and its instincts are far more prevalent in its decision. But still, to do or not do is an exercise of the animal to express its free will. A dog can choose to ignore its master's command, or it can obey its master's command. In much the same way, we as humans can obey the laws of our society, or we can choose to ignore them. It is somewhat of a contradiction that religious champions claim on one hand we are moral because of God, as if we have no choice but to be moral because God has designed us that way. But on the other hand, we have free will because God has also designed us that way. The last main point that religious folk bring up is that of reason. They claim that the human race has reason because of God. We have reason because we know that not only does society expect us to be reasonable, but because being unreasonable can lead to other parties being unreasonable, which most of the time leads to an awkward, ugly, or even violent situation that puts both parties into a scenario that creates pain and discomfort. This is simply logical, and as creatures who can predict from previous interactions what may happen during this particular interaction, we choose the path that is less likely to yield a destructive or painful result. We would have to be complete idiots not to rule our lives this way. It is almost insulting to the human race to suggest that without God we would all be completely unreasonable, immoral idiots with no free will whatsoever. Those who do not believe often attack the Bible and the Catholic Church as evidence that God does not exist. On the Bible front, they say that the Bible is not even authentic itself. It is an edited version of many Gospels that has been controlled by an organization, the Catholic Church, which claims to be holy and righteous, but is in fact one of the most corrupt organizations ever to exist. Millions of children have been sexually abused by the Catholic Church, the institution that claims to be representing the good and loving God. To make it worse, when these crimes began to be exposed, the Catholic Church went out of its way to cover these crimes up, rather than help expose them and bring those responsible to justice. If God exists, and he is all-knowing and all-powerful, why would he have allowed this to happen, particularly in his name? Children were entrusted to the Catholic Church under the assurance that they will be safe as they are being looked after by an extension of God. Yet this all-knowing, all-powerful God did nothing to stop this happening. We are told that God knows the secrets of our hearts. Did he know the hearts of these children were broken? as they were systematically abused in his name. It is a fair argument to say that God does not exist, when not only does he allow this to happen, but he allows it to happen in his name. These people were able to get into a position of trust and power through their allegiance to him. This is a massive violation of human rights that has ruined so many lives. Yet despite it being done in the good God's name, he did nothing. But this is not the only crime of the Roman Catholic Church. The Crusades were another complete violation of human rights. The Crusades caused the suffering of millions for hundreds of years. When the first successful crusade captured Jerusalem, it is said they killed every man, woman, and child, and did so not just in the name of God, but also in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was himself a complete, non-violent pacifist. Jesus is the man who coined the phrase, "turn the other cheek." Yet the Pope ordered knights to take Jerusalem and kill its occupants in the name of God and his Son. Yet God did nothing to stop this and allowed such a person to continue his reign as God's right-hand man on earth. It is therefore little wonder that many people see the Catholic Church as illegitimately qualified to represent the good God that cares about us and knows the secrets of our hearts. It does not seem plausible to believe in this God when its representation on earth is so poorly executed and has committed such horrendous crimes. Many also point out that it is ironic at best that the organization that claims to represent Jesus Christ is the Roman Catholic Church, when it was the Romans themselves that tortured Jesus to death. However, if you read the New Testament, which has been controlled and edited by the Catholic Church for nearly 2,000 years, they spin a different story. That it was in fact the Jews who were responsible for Jesus' death, because they put so much pressure on poor old Pontius Pilate that he had to give in to them and have Jesus executed. This is somewhat absurd in the minds of many, because Rome was the absolute superpower of the world. They crushed any uprising with brutal punishments, including crucifixion. And yet the Catholic Church has pushed this narrative that it was the Jews' fault, that they put so much pressure on the governor that he simply had to follow their instructions. It can be argued that much of the punishment that has been bestowed on the Jews is partly attributed to their apparent treatment of Jesus Christ. It is true that the Bible or New Testament is edited. It is also important to note that the decision to edit down the Bible is one of pragmatism. There were so many Gospels of Jesus that in fact there was no Bible, just a collection of books from different people talking about the life of Jesus. I could imagine that yes, the Jewish priests would have found Jesus annoying, and maybe even a threat to their order. But the decision was made by Rome to have him so horrifically killed. And the idea that Pontius Pilate, as Roman governor, with the power that came with that role, was somewhat powerless to give into the wishes of the Jews is ridiculous. Imagine if you were God. You send your only son to earth, and he is crucified by the Romans. Then, a few centuries later, the Romans claim to take ownership of him and proclaim that they have the franchise on his teachings and that you should pay homage and money to them if you want to be with the Lord in paradise. Imagine if somebody killed someone close to you, and to add injury to insult, they claimed they are the person who knew them best, and to support them both morally and financially in their self-appointment of being the person through which you can connect to them. I think it would make anybody angry, yet not God, as it seems. God is perfectly happy to sit back and watch the very organization who killed his son claim ownership over him, whilst also committing horrific sexual assaults on innocent children in their care. It is hard to believe the good God of Christianity exists when he sits back and allows such things to happen. In the Bible, God is all-powerful, yet those of faith will say the immortal words, well, you can't blame God for that. When something good happens, it is always attributed to God. Praise the Lord. I got a promotion at work. With God's grace, I managed to finish on time. Every little good thing is attributed to God, as if all things are down to God. This is understandable that they as Bible followers would think this way, especially when reading passages like Exodus chapter 4 verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, "Who made man's mouth? Who makes man mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord?" The Psalm, verse 105, chapter 16. He called for a famine on the land of Canaan, cutting off its food supply. God kept crops from growing until food was scarce everywhere in the land. Amos, verse 3, chapter 6. If there is a calamity in a city, will the Lord not have done it? Isaiah 45, verse 5. I am the Lord. There is no other beside me. There is no God. I will guide you through, not knowing me, that men will know from the rising to the setting of the sun. There is no one beside me. I am the Lord. There is no other. The one forming light and creating darkness, causing well-being and creating calamity. I am the Lord who does all of these. It is interesting that these texts make it clear that God claims credit for all things that happen, good or bad. Yet so many people of faith take the perception that if something good happens, it is down to God. Yet if something bad happens, you simply can't blame God for that. In effect, these people are changing God into the God they want. not the God that is actually evident in the Old Testament, not the God who killed millions of infants in the flood of Noah's Ark. It is understandable that people want to worship a good God. It is comfortable to think that God only does good and cares about them and wants to enrich their lives and keep them safe. But in changing God, you are in effect worshipping a different God, which in of itself is blasphemy, because you are worshipping a false idol, because it is actually not the God of the Bible. On Earth, 3.9% of all children die before the age of 5, which means that on average 15,000 children die every day. This means that on average around 5.5 million children die every year before the age of 5. So when someone says, "Praise the Lord, I have found my car keys. Oh Lord, thank you for your divine intervention," they are essentially claiming that God did not think it was important enough to save any of the 15,000 children that died that day. However, was willing to step in and help them find their car keys. This is almost narcissistic in nature. The idea that God loves that particular person so much that he thought it more important to help them find their car keys than it was to save an innocent child's life. It is interesting to non-believers that people of devoted faith see the scriptures of the Bible as absolute facts. The fact that those stories have been around for 2,000 years seems to add authenticity to the stories. It is understandable to an extent, as the age and survival of the Bible would suggest that it must have been authentic. There must have been something or some kind of power within it. How else would it have taken hold and helped shape the world that we live in if it were not true? Without being true, how could it have become so powerful that 2,000 years later so many still adamantly believe? How could it be that there are so many grand churches in nearly every town of the Christian world? How could it be that so many people pay homage at the grand buildings of the Vatican just to maybe catch a distant glimpse of the Pope? The fact of the matter is, the majesty of Christianity is an incredibly impressive thing. It is easy to be awestruck by the magnificence of the Christian buildings and their history. The fact that it has been around for 2,000 years makes it seem primordial, as if it has been stamped on the very essence of humanity since our creation, as if it is somehow part of our DNA. Those who are non-believers would argue that the age of Christianity is part of what makes it seem so unlikely. The fact of the matter is, the human race was very primitive at the time of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. It has been estimated that around only 3% of the population of Palestine and Jerusalem could read at the time of Christ, and that would have been even lower around the time of Moses, because that is further back in history, and the Jews were an enslaved race. The sun dominated their world and their days, instructing them when to plant crops and when to travel. Yet nobody even knew what the sun was. The earth was thought to be flat, and lightning was the anger of the gods. So, it is understandable that non-believers argue that the people were incredibly gullible at this time in history, and therefore stories about Moses being commanded by God, Jesus being the Son of God, would have been much more readily accepted than they would be today. For the vast majority of us, if we met a man on the street and he claimed to have seen a man bring another man back to life, you would struggle to believe such a story. Yet, because these stories have been around for 2,000 years, they accept them as being real, even though if they had never heard of the Bible, they would obviously not believe the same story told to them today. Perfectly rational people that simply do not accept tales of magic and fantasy as being real, as the vast majority of us don't, are perfectly happy to accept such stories because they are written in a book from so long ago, as if the age of a story makes it more vastly likely to be true. So why are so many rational people that would not believe in such a story happy to believe they are real in religious books? In the end, it comes down to faith. It comes down to people choosing what they want to believe. Every man and woman has the right to do so, and if it brings them happiness and comfort, then all the good. It is the decision to give religion a special place in their hearts that allows them to make an exception in terms of their usual rational, logical, evidence-based assessment of what is true and what is not. There is no harm in a person taking this outlook towards religion, as long as they do not become so fundamental in their belief that they allow themselves to become manipulated into carrying out acts that harm others and go against the very message of the religion they are following. The human race is young in terms of the creation of the universe, so we have much to learn. One day, we may discover exactly how the universe was started, what created the singularity and caused it to explode. It may be that we discover it was God all along, but the chances that this God, or being, or force, is the God of the Bible, or the God that people chose to believe in, are slim in the minds of many, and particularly those who are heavily engaged in science and the process of designing their belief on hard evidence and plausibility. The truth is, no one knows for sure, but as humans who do have free will and morality, we should respect each other's views and beliefs until the moment we as a race find out for sure what really started the universe and if there really is a God.